This is what it looks like when a man is asked a question that already has an answer on paper, like being asked where the money went while someone is holding the bank records in their hand. In one hearing, Adam Schiff didn't accuse. He mapped 47 encrypted calls, 7 offshore jurisdictions, and $3.8 billion that moved right after, then turned to Miller and asked one question. So here's the problem. If none of this was illegal, why did Miller say nothing? This is not a normal congressional hearing. This is a controlled detonation. The official title said, Oversight of DHS Secure Communications Protocols, but that label collapsed the moment Adam Schiff opened a red folder and began laying out what was, in effect, a financial trail tied directly to classified government systems. The setting matters. House Oversight Committee, midweek, cameras rolling. But what matters more is the shift in tone that happened in seconds. This stopped being about policy compliance and became a question of whether government infrastructure had been used to coordinate money movement offshore. And the numbers were not vague. 47 encrypted calls, 7 foreign jurisdictions known for offshore financial structures, a total of $3.8 billion moving within a 24 to 72-hour window after those calls. Those are not talking points. Those are coordinates. Miller had already testified for over half an hour before this moment. He sounded prepared. He cited regulations. He answered like someone who knew the system. But there is a difference between answering questions about procedures and answering a question that connects your office to specific actions, specific timelines, and specific financial outcomes. And that difference is where everything broke. Because when Schiff spoke again, he didn't speculate. He didn't ask broadly. He narrowed the frame to a single, prosecutable idea. Encrypted communications originating from DHS-controlled devices directed at foreign nationals tied to offshore financial entities, followed by large-scale fund transfers. That's not abstract anymore. That's a sequence. He walked through it slowly, almost clinically. Dubai, Singapore, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Cayman Islands, Panama, British Virgin Islands, each one not just a place, but a function in the global financial system, legal counsel, trustees, corporate service providers, registered agents, structures designed to obscure ownership and movement. And then came the pivot. Schiff didn't just present the calls. He cross-referenced the recipients. He connected them to entities that had handled U.S. government funds. He implied coordination, not possibility, not theory, coordination. So the question that followed was not complicated. It was surgical. Who made those calls? No legal jargon, no escape route hidden in phrasing, just a direct line between action and accountability. And this is where the story stops being about what was said and starts being about what wasn't. Because in a system where officials are trained to respond, to deflect, to reframe, silence is not neutral. Silence in that room, under those conditions, becomes data. It becomes part of the record. It becomes something that can be measured, timed, and interpreted. So before we go any further, understand what you are actually watching here. Not a debate, not a disagreement. A moment where evidence is stacked, the timeline is locked, and a single question is left hanging in the air, unanswered. And the longer it hangs, the heavier it gets. Because once that question landed, the room didn't react like a political space. It reacted like a crime scene that had just been outlined in chalk. Miller didn't interrupt. He didn't object. He didn't even attempt to redirect. His posture stayed fixed, his hands flat against the table, his expression controlled, but not in the way of someone confident. Controlled like someone calculating risk in real time, measuring every possible answer and realizing each one leads somewhere worse. And Adam Schiff knew it. So he didn't rush. He slowed down. That's the part most people miss. When you already have the structure of the truth, you don't need volume. You need precision. Schiff began layering what prosecutors call sequence integrity, not just what happened, but the order in which it happened, and why that order matters. He introduced the first anchor point, February 14th, a signal call placed from a DHS-registered extension to a number in Dubai. Duration, 23 minutes. Then he moved forward. February 16th, 41 hours later. $620 million transferred to a Singapore-based entity connected to the same network. Not coincidence. Timing. He repeated the pattern again. February 18th, call to Singapore. February 21st, $540 million wired into a Swiss-managed structure. Then again, and again, and again. Every call followed by movement. Every movement tied to an entity connected to the call recipient. Every recipient operating inside a system designed to conceal ownership, disperse liability, and fragment accountability across jurisdictions. This is what evidence stacking actually looks like. Not one shocking detail, but dozens of aligned details that remove randomness from the equation. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. 47 times. Not once. Not twice. 47. That's not noise. That's design. And then Schiff made the second move, the one that transforms suspicion into pressure. He introduced the metadata layer. Not content. Metadata. The kind of information that doesn't tell you what was said, but tells you everything about behavior. Who called whom? When, for how long, and from which device. Encrypted apps like Signal don't protect that. They can't. Which means even if every word of those conversations vanished, the skeleton of coordination remained intact. A timestamp here, a duration there, a location match, a repeated contact chain across multiple financial nodes. It's not what they said. It's that they spoke. Right before money moved. And now the question becomes unavoidable. If these were legitimate government communications, why use encrypted channels that bypass standard logging systems? Why contact individuals whose primary role is managing offshore financial structures? Why does every interaction sit directly upstream of a financial transaction measured in hundreds of millions? That's not policy behavior. That's operational behavior. At this point, Miller's legal team tried to intervene, carefully, strategically. They didn't deny the calls. They didn't dispute the numbers. They reframed the context: national security, sensitive communications, classified interactions. But that defense has a weakness, because the moment you claim national security, you're asserting legitimacy. You're saying these actions were necessary, authorized, and aligned with government objectives. And Schiff cut straight through it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue emotionally. He redefined the frame. Lawyers managing shell companies that received government funds. Trustees overseeing offshore accounts receiving federal transfers. Advisors linked to entities flagged in Treasury suspicious activity reports. That's not national security. That's financial architecture. And once that distinction is made, the shield disappears. Because now the conversation is no longer about classified operations. It's about whether classified systems were used to facilitate something they were never meant to touch. And Miller is still silent. No correction. No denial. No alternate explanation offered to the committee, the cameras, or the public record. Which means the only thing growing in that room is the weight of what hasn't been said yet. And then the hearing crossed a line most people didn't even realize existed. Because this is the moment it stopped being about patterns and started being about intent. Adam Schiff didn't just leave the timeline hanging, he closed the loop. He introduced the wire records. Not summaries, not estimates. Actual transfer alignments mapped against the call log, one by one, date by date, hour by hour. February 14th call, February 16th transfer, February 18th call, February 21st transfer. The gaps were consistent. 24 to 72 hours, just enough time to structure movement, route funds, and settle positions across jurisdictions designed to absorb and obscure. That consistency is not random, it's operational discipline. And this is where the narrative shifts from what happened to why it happened this way. Because in legitimate government operations, communication precedes action, but it is documented, authorized, and traceable through official channels. What Schiff was outlining here was something else entirely. Communication deliberately routed through encrypted applications, followed by financial activity that mirrored the conversation windows but avoided standard oversight pipelines. That's not inefficiency. That's avoidance. Then came the escalation. Schiff revealed that some of these calls did not just generate metadata. They generated intercepts, foreign endpoints, legal authorization, intelligence collection, the kind of collection that doesn't happen casually and doesn't get discussed lightly in an open hearing. He didn't read the transcripts. He didn't need to. He summarized them. Conversations about payment schedules, references to account structures, discussions of beneficial ownership, language about avoiding reporting thresholds. Not policy language, transaction language. And now the frame is complete. Because if the timeline shows coordination and the intercepts suggest intent, then what you're looking at is no longer ambiguous behavior. It becomes a question of whether government systems were used to facilitate the movement of funds in a way that bypasses detection frameworks built specifically to prevent that kind of activity. And sitting in the center of that question is Miller, still unmoving, still silent, still offering nothing to counter a structure that is tightening with every second. This is where the moral contrast becomes unavoidable. On one side, you have the architecture of power, secure lines, classified systems, institutional authority, the ability to communicate across borders without scrutiny. On the other side, you have the public, taxpayers who assume that those systems exist to protect national interests, not to coordinate financial pathways that lead out of the country. So ask yourself this. If a private citizen made 47 encrypted calls to offshore intermediaries and billions moved immediately after, would we call that coincidence? Would we call it complexity? Or would we call it what it looks like? Because the only difference here is the infrastructure used. And that difference matters. Because when government systems are involved, the expectation is not just legality, it's accountability, higher threshold, higher scrutiny, higher consequence. And yet, what unfolded in that room suggests the exact opposite. Systems designed for security potentially being used to create opacity. That's not a partisan issue. That's a structural failure, if it's true. And here's where the silence starts to change shape. It's no longer just a pause. It's no longer hesitation. It becomes resistance. Because every second without an answer is a second where the existing narrative goes unchallenged. Every second where the evidence remains intact, uncontested, and unrefuted in front of a live record. And Schiff understands that better than anyone in the room. Which is why he does something that transforms silence into evidence. He takes out his phone, opens a stopwatch, and turns time itself into pressure. And once that stopwatch started, silence stopped being passive. It became measurable, visible, undeniable. Adam Schiff didn't speak right away. He let the seconds accumulate. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Each one landing heavier than the last, because now the absence of an answer was no longer abstract. It was being recorded in real time, converted into something the public could see, count, and remember. This wasn't a delay. This was a refusal under observation. Miller sat there, jaw tightening, eyes fixed forward, surrounded by attorneys who had already run out of moves. No objection, no clarification, no attempt to reframe the narrative that had just been built around him. And that's the moment the balance of power flipped. Because hearings are usually controlled by the witness's ability to respond, to redirect, to introduce doubt. But here, control shifted to the question, and the longer it went unanswered, the stronger it became. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then Schiff spoke again, not to ask a new question, but to introduce something far more dangerous. Corroboration. Return calls, not to DHS lines, to personal devices. Now, the circle tightens, because once communication leaves official channels and continues privately, the defense of government business begins to collapse. And Schiff didn't stop there. He identified a senior policy advisor in Miller's office, someone connected to those same communication patterns, someone who had recently destroyed over 1,000 documents, someone who had received a transfer tied directly to Miller. This is no longer a pattern. This is a network. 3 minutes. And now the implications are no longer theoretical. Schiff references recovered messages, signal messages that were supposed to disappear, conversations that outlined timing, amounts, coordination. He references intelligence collection authorized under law, intercepts that align with the financial data, reinforcing the same story from a different angle. Call logs, wire transfers, intercepts, messages, witness cooperation. That's not one source. That's convergence. 4 minutes. And here is where the moral frame locks in. Because this is no longer about procedure or compliance or technical misuse of systems. This is about whether power was used to bypass the very safeguards designed to protect public money. It's about whether the tools meant to defend national security were repurposed to move funds into structures built to hide ownership and accountability. That's not politics. That's trust. 5 minutes. And still nothing. So Schiff does what a prosecutor does when the record is complete. He stops asking. He counts. 300, 310, 312, and then he ends it. Not with speculation, not with accusation, with referral. Department of Justice. Conspiracy statutes. Money laundering provisions. Misuse of classified systems. Because at that point, the hearing has served its purpose. The question was asked. The evidence was presented. The opportunity to respond was given and refused. And here's the part that matters more than anything else. Silence does not erase evidence. It confirms its weight. So when you step back from all of this, strip away the titles, the politics, the setting, what you are left with is a simple, uncomfortable question. If 47 encrypted calls led to $3.8 billion moving offshore, and the person in charge refused to explain any of it, what exactly are we supposed to believe happened? Because this is bigger than one hearing. Bigger than one official. This is about whether the system works when it is tested by the people inside it. So now it's on you. Do you think that silence was caution or confession? If you've made it this far, don't just watch. Engage. Like this video if you believe accountability should never depend on who's asking the question. Comment your perspective, because this is not a closed case in the public eye. Share it so more people can see exactly what happened in that room. And subscribe, because the next time silence speaks louder than answers, you'll want to hear it.